The crimson sand of Nexaris Prime crunched beneath General Vexithara's four-taloned feet as she stood before the towering obsidian spire that housed the hegemony's high command. The message crystal in her scaled palm still pulsed with the impossible. Order she'd received mere hours ago. Build an army capable of breaking the Void Syndicate's stranglehold on the Outer Rim. Resources, minimal. Timeline, 30 cycles. Failure is not acceptable. Vexthara's serpentine neck coiled in frustration. The hegemony had been losing ground to the Syndicate for 3 standard years, their traditional military doctrine proving inadequate against an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move. The High Command's previous generals had all fallen too, disgrace or death, leaving her, a supposed expert in unconventional warfare, as their final desperate gambit. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd earned her reputation by studying the galaxy's most unpredictable species, cataloging their tactics and psychological profiles. Her research had led her to one inescapable conclusion: conventional armies bred conventional defeats. What the hegemony needed wasn't more soldiers, it needed chaos incarnate. Inside her private quarters aboard the dreadnought Talon's Edge, Vexithara accessed her classified xenological database. Her golden eyes scanned thousands of species profiles until she found what she was looking for. The files made her scales ripple with unease. Homo sapiens. Designation, Death World species. Status, quarantined by Galactic Accord 2847. Reason, extreme psychological instability and unpredictable combat behavior. The warnings were extensive. Humans had been discovered only 50 years prior, their homeworld a nightmare of natural disasters, apex predators, and environmental extremes that should have prevented intelligent life from evolving. Yet somehow, impossibly, they had not only survived, but thrived. When first contact was established, the initial diplomatic mission had gone catastrophically wrong. 3 hegemony ships had been destroyed not by superior technology, but by 5 humans who had somehow turned the vessel's own systems against them through methods that defied military logic. The Galactic Accord had immediately classified Earth as a restricted zone, forbidding any further contact. The official report claimed humans were too dangerous for integration into galactic society. Vexithara had always suspected there was more to the story. Now, staring at the tactical analyses hidden in the deepest layers of military intelligence, she understood. Humans didn't fight like other species. They were unpredictable, adaptable, and seemingly immune to the psychological warfare that crippled most enemies. They treated impossible odds not as deterrents, but as challenges. Most unsettling of all, they appeared to actually function better under extreme stress. The plan forming in her mind was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. The High Command wanted an army, but armies were predictable. Instead, she would give them something the Void Syndicate could never prepare for, a weapon that thought like prey but fought like a predator, that turned disadvantage into opportunity and desperation into strength. Vexithara activated her secure communication array and sent a priority message to her most trusted operative, Commander Raxiel. Prepare the stealth corvette Shadow Strike. Destination: Sol System, Earth. Mission parameters: retrieve exactly 5 specimens. Selection criteria attached. Maintain absolute secrecy. As the message transmitted across the void, Vexithara allowed herself a predatory smile. The hegemony had ordered her to build an army. Instead, she was about to unleash something far more dangerous. Human ingenuity backed by alien technology, confined aboard the most advanced warship her species had ever constructed. The Void Syndicate had no idea what was coming for them. 3 cycles later, the Shadow Strike materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system like a whisper of darkness against the star field. Commander Raxiel studied the quarantine buoys surrounding the 3rd planet, their automated warnings broadcasting in 17 galactic languages. Restricted zone. Authorized personnel only. Violation punishable by immediate termination. So, irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, violating one of the galaxy's most sacred interdictions, all because his general believed 5 members of a primitive species could accomplish what entire fleets had failed to achieve. Raxiel's research had been thorough. The humans he needed weren't random selections. Vexathara's specifications had been precise. She wanted individuals who embodied different aspects of human adaptability. A strategist who could see patterns where others saw chaos, an engineer who could make the impossible functional, a warrior who thrived in close combat, a pilot who treated physics as suggestions rather than laws, and a wild card, someone whose unpredictability was so extreme that even other humans couldn't predict their actions. The first target was Kalen Torvin, a former military strategist turned private security consultant. The human had been cashiered from his planet's armed forces not for incompetence, but for developing tactics so unorthodox that his superiors couldn't understand them. His methods had never failed, but they violated every principle of conventional warfare. He was currently trapped in a corporate office building, surrounded by hostile mercenaries who had underestimated him. Again, Raxiel watched through the Shadow Strike's sensors as Kalen systematically dismantled his opponents using the building's own infrastructure. Fire suppression systems became smokescreens, elevator shafts became ambush points, and the very architecture became his ally. When the dust settled, 17 armed professionals lay unconscious, and Kalen had escaped through a window using nothing but office furniture and electrical cable. The second target, Dr. Nix Velkorian, was easier to locate but infinitely more dangerous to approach. The cybernetics engineer was currently jury-rigging a fusion reactor using salvaged parts and what appeared to be kitchen appliances. The fact that her makeshift device was generating more power than it had any right to was testament to her abilities. The fact that she was doing it while her laboratory was under siege by corporate raiders spoke to her mental focus under pressure. Zephyr Brightwater, the pilot, was perhaps the most spectacular to observe. Currently engaged in an atmospheric chase scene that defied multiple laws of physics. She was piloting a vehicle that should have been scrap metal through a course that should have been impossible. Her pursuers, numbering in the dozens, had the advantage of superior numbers and firepower. She had creativity and a complete disregard for the structural limitations of her aircraft. The warrior, Grim Ashfall, required no observation period. His reputation preceded him. An underground fighter who had never lost a match, not because he was the strongest or fastest, but because he adapted to each opponent so completely that by the end of each fight, he seemed to know them better than they knew themselves. He fought like he was conducting a psychological examination with violence as his tool. The final target gave Raxiel pause. Quill Ravencrest wasn't a warrior, strategist, or engineer. They were what humans called an artist, specifically one who specialized in creating chaos for its own sake. Their psychological profile was a maze of contradictions, brilliant but unpredictable, creative but destructive, loyal but only to concepts rather than individuals. They were currently in the process of exposing a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of human government, using nothing but social manipulation and an uncanny ability to be in exactly the right place at the wrong time. Each human represented a different facet of their species' most dangerous trait, the ability to turn any situation to their advantage, regardless of how hopeless it appeared. Separately, they were formidable. Together, under the right circumstances, they might be unstoppable. The extraction would require perfect timing and flawless execution. Raxiel began calculating approach vectors, knowing that he had one chance to acquire all 5 targets before Earth's primitive but numerous defense systems could respond. The irony of needing to exercise such caution around a quarantined species wasn't lost on him. As the shadow strike began its descent toward Earth's atmosphere, Raxiel wondered if General Vexthera truly understood what she was unleashing. These weren't soldiers to be commanded. They were forces of nature to be aimed and released. The hunt was about to begin. The extraction of 5 humans from a quarantined world should have been impossible. Raxiel accomplished it in under 6 hours. Kalen Torvin was the first to wake aboard the Shadow Strike, finding himself in a detention cell that was more comfortable than his last apartment. His analytical mind immediately began cataloging details: artificial gravity slightly lighter than Earth standard, atmospheric composition enriched with trace elements his body didn't recognize, and walls that hummed, with energy patterns suggesting force field technology rather than traditional barriers. "Fascinating," he murmured, running his fingers along the seamless surface. "Non-metallic construction, possibly some form of crystalline matrix. The energy signature suggests you're thinking too hard." The voice belonged to Nyx Velkorian, speaking from the adjacent cell. The cybernetics engineer was already examining a control panel that had mysteriously appeared in her wall. "Whatever material this is, it's responding to neural patterns. Watch." The panel flickered and changed configuration as Nyx focused on it. "Adaptive interface technology. It's reading our bioelectric signatures and adjusting accordingly. Whoever built this understands human physiology better than they should." From across the corridor, grim Ashfall's gravelly voice cut through their analysis. "Understanding us and containing us are different things." The underground fighter was testing the structural integrity of his cell with methodical precision, applying pressure at specific points. "These walls might hold most species, but they've never dealt with human spite." "Speak for yourself," came a melodious voice from the end of the corridor. Zephyr Brightwater was somehow suspended horizontally against her cell wall, having apparently discovered how to manipulate the gravitational field. "I've already figured out how to fly in here. Give me another hour and I'll have the whole ship dancing." The fifth voice was the most unsettling. Quill Ravencrest spoke in a whisper that somehow carried perfectly to all cells. "They're listening. You know, cataloging every word, every reaction. Someone went to considerable trouble to collect us specifically. The question isn't how we escape, it's why we shouldn't." Before anyone could respond, the detention area filled with a soft harmonic tone, and the cells deactivated. Standing in the corridor was a figure that none of them could have imagined. Tall, scaled, with golden eyes that held an intelligence, both alien and somehow familiar. "I am General Vexithera of the Hegemony Defense Corps," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that their translator implants rendered as authority and respect. "You have been brought here not as prisoners, but as potential allies in a war that spans star systems." Kalen stepped forward, his strategic mind already working. "The galactic quarantine. You violated it to bring us here. That suggests desperation, not opportunity." "Your species is feared throughout the galaxy," Vexithara continued, unfazed by his observation. "The official records classify humans as too dangerous for contact. I've studied those same records and reached a different conclusion. You're not dangerous because you're violent. You're dangerous because you're unpredictable." Nyx had been scanning Vexithara with senses augmented by her cybernetic implants. "Your physiology suggests a reptilian ancestry, but your technology is clearly more advanced than anything on Earth. You're military, but not just military. You're a researcher. You've studied us." "For 3 years," Vexithara confirmed. "While my people fought a conventional war against an enemy that adapts to conventional tactics. We've lost 17 star systems to the Void Syndicate because they think like us. They anticipate our strategies because they understand our psychology." Grim cracked his knuckles, a sound that seemed to echo strangely in the alien corridor. "But they don't understand human psychology." "Precisely. Humans fight like prey that refuses to die. You turn disadvantages into weapons, desperation into opportunity. You adapt not just tactically, but psychologically, becoming what your enemy least expects. Zephyr had been studying the ship's architecture during the conversation. This vessel, it's not just a transport, is it? It's a weapon system. Advanced beyond anything I've seen, but the design philosophy, it's not built for fleet engagement. It's built for impossible missions. Quill spoke without looking at any of them, their gaze fixed on something only they could see. She didn't just bring us here to fight her war. She brought us here to change how wars are fought. The question is, do we want to be weapons, or do we want to be ourselves? Vexathara's scales rippled in what might have been amusement. The choice is yours. I can return you to Earth with appropriate compensation for your time. Or you can see what 5 humans can accomplish with technology that makes the impossible merely improbable. She gestured, and the corridor walls became transparent, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. In the distance, a massive space station drifted in the void, its hull scarred by weapon fire. That is Nexus Station, former capital of the Talos system. The Void Syndicate conquered it 6 months ago using tactics that our best strategists still don't understand. Intel suggests they're using it as a testing ground for new psychological warfare techniques. Kalen studied the station with professional interest. You want us to take it back? I want you to do what humans do best, Vexthera replied. I want you to do something impossible. The 5 humans exchanged glances, each recognizing something in the others that they rarely saw reflected back. The hunger for a challenge worthy of their abilities. The war was about to change. The Shadow Strike was unlike anything that had ever existed in the galaxy. A perfect fusion of hegemony engineering and theoretical human combat doctrine. As Vexthera led her 5 recruits through the ship's corridors, each human reacted according to their nature. Kalen's strategic mind cataloged every detail. The way the corridors could reconfigure themselves, creating new tactical possibilities. The modular weapon systems that could be reassembled mid-combat. The AI that didn't just process information, but learned from human decision-making patterns. This ship thinks, he observed, running his hand along a wall that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Not just artificial intelligence, adaptive intelligence. It's studying us. And we're studying it, Nyx replied, her cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's systems. The AI isn't just learning our patterns, it's incorporating them. Look at this. She gestured, and a holographic display materialized, showing the ship's neural network. It's reorganizing itself based on our presence, becoming more human. Grimm tested the handholds and surfaces, his fighter's instincts mapping the ship as potential combat terrain. Good balance, solid construction. But why do I feel like this whole ship is designed around the assumption that we'll be outnumbered? 1,000 to 1? Because you will be, Vexathera confirmed, leading them into the ship's primary command center. The chamber was a sphere of crystalline walls and floating control surfaces designed to accommodate multiple forms of consciousness simultaneously. The Void Syndicate controls 17 star systems. Their fleets number in the thousands. This single vessel will face odds that would crush any conventional force. Zephyr was already at the pilot's station, her hands dancing across controls that seemed to anticipate her movements. She's beautiful, she whispered, and the ship seemed to purr in response. Faster than anything should be able to move, more agile than physics allows. But this isn't just about speed, is it? This ship is designed to be somewhere it shouldn't, be doing something it can't do. The Shadow Strike represents 12 years of theoretical development based on human combat footage from First Contact, Vexathara explained. Every system is designed around one principle, turning impossible odds into inevitable victory through adaptive unpredictability. Quill had been silent, but now they spoke while studying a tactical display showing Syndicate fleet movements. You've created a weapon that fights like us, but weapons are tools, and tools serve purposes. What's your real purpose, General? What aren't you telling us? Vexithara's scales rippled in what her species considered a display of respect. The Void Syndicate isn't just conquering systems, they're studying species. Every world they take, they capture representatives and analyze them. They're building a database of psychological profiles for every sentient race in the galaxy. The implications hit Kalen immediately. They're preparing for something larger, psychological warfare on a galactic scale. Our intelligence suggests they've developed technology that can induce species-specific psychological breakdowns, entire populations surrendering without a shot being fired, their will to resist simply turned off. Nyx's cybernetic eye glowed as she processed data streams. But they've never studied humans. We're the one variable they haven't accounted for. More than that, Vexthera continued, preliminary analysis suggests human psychological patterns are naturally resistant to their techniques. Your species' unpredictability isn't just tactical, it's a form of mental armor. Grimm smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant sight. So we're not just here to win battles. We're here to break their whole system. The first test will be Nexus Station. Intelligence indicates they're using it to process captured populations from 3 different species. If their psychological conditioning techniques work, those populations will become willing servants of the Syndicate. Zephyr's fingers were already plotting approach vectors on the navigation system. How long do we have? 6 cycles before they complete the conditioning process. After that, 3 entire species become extensions of Syndicate will. Quill laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. So we have 6 days to infiltrate an impregnable space station, overcome impossible odds, rescue 3 species, and do it all with 5 humans and 1 ship. That's the mission, Vexithara confirmed. The 5 humans looked at each other, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were being asked to do something impossible, outnumbered beyond any reasonable calculation, against an enemy that had never lost. It was exactly the kind of challenge that humans lived for. Kalen stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of command he'd never been allowed to exercise. We'll need complete tactical autonomy. No oversight, no second-guessing our methods. Agreed. Nyx's implants flared as she bonded more deeply with the ship's systems. I'll need access to all technical specifications. If we're going to do the impossible, I'll need to make this ship impossible too. Done. Grimm cracked his knuckles again. What's the Syndicate's primary psychological warfare technique? Fear, Vexthera replied. They've weaponized terror itself. Grimm's smile grew wider. Good. Fear works both ways. Zephyr was already running flight simulations that made veteran pilots queasy just watching. When do we leave? Now, Vexithara said, and the shadow strike began to move. In the depths of space, the Void Syndicate's sensors detected nothing, just empty void where no ship should be. They had no way of knowing that 5 humans were coming for them, armed with technology that made miracles routine and carrying intentions that no sane military analyst would dare to contemplate. Nexus Station hung in space like a malevolent star, its massive structure bristling with defensive platforms and energy shields that could vaporize an entire fleet. The Void Syndicate had transformed the former trade hub into a fortress of psychological torture, its gleaming spires now darkened with the purpose of breaking minds rather than facilitating commerce. Aboard the Shadow Strike, 5 humans prepared for what should have been a suicide mission. 17,000 life signs aboard the station, Nyx reported, her cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's long-range sensors. Roughly 2,000 Syndicate personnel, the rest are prisoners from the conquered systems. Vegan-class empaths, Krolex heavy worlders, and Serani hive minds, all species known for their strong social bonds. Kalen studied the tactical display with the intensity of a chess master examining an impossible position. They're not just conditioning random prisoners. They've specifically chosen species whose psychological structures depend on community, connection. Break that bond, and you break the entire species. The conditioning chambers are here, here, and here, Quill said, their finger tracing patterns on the holographic station layout. But that's not what interests me. Look at the power, distribution. The station's energy grid highlighted under their touch. They're not just running psychological conditioning, they're running massive quantum computing operations. They're not just breaking minds, they're mapping them. Zephyr brought the shadow strike closer to the station, using gravitational anomalies and sensor shadows to mask their approach. Defensive grid is adaptive. It learns from each attack and adjusts accordingly. No wonder conventional tactics fail. The station literally gets smarter with each engagement. Grimm had been studying the Syndicate personnel files with professional interest. Their security forces are all psychologically conditioned themselves. No fear, no hesitation, no individual initiative. They fight like a single organism with thousands of bodies. Which gives us our first advantage, Kalen noted. They can't adapt to true unpredictability because they've eliminated it from their own ranks. Vexthara observed the humans with fascination. Where her own strategists saw an impregnable fortress, they saw a puzzle with exploitable flaws. The station's shields can withstand the combined firepower of a battle fleet. How do you propose to get inside? Zephyr smiled, her hands all ready, dancing across the navigation controls. Who said anything about going through the shields? The shadow strike began to accelerate, not toward the station, but toward the system's primary star. The ship's hull temperature rose as they dove into the stellar corona, using the star's own magnetic field to mask their approach. The station's sensors can't penetrate stellar radiation, Nix explained, making real-time modifications to the ship's shielding. But more importantly, they're not looking for anything crazy enough to hide in a star. Insane, Vexithara breathed, watching her instruments register temperatures that should have vaporized any known material. Exactly, Quill laughed. Sanity is predictable. Predictable gets you killed. At the precise moment when the star's magnetic field aligned with the station's gravitational shadow, Zephyr pulled the shadow strike out of its stellar dive and directly through a microscopic gap in the defensive grid. A gap that existed for exactly 3.7 seconds during the orbital cycle. Impossible, Vexithara whispered. Only if you think like everyone else, Kalen replied, already focused on the next phase. Nix, can you interface with the station systems? Already doing it, she confirmed, her cybernetic implants glowing as she established connection. Their security AI is impressive, but it's never encountered human pattern intrusion protocols. I'm not breaking in. I'm confusing it into thinking I belong here. The station's internal layout materialized in perfect detail. Thousands of prisoners, in conditioning chambers, Syndicate personnel maintaining their psychological torture equipment, and in the center of it all, something that made all 5 humans pause. What is that? Grimm asked, pointing to a massive crystalline structure at the station's core. Vexithara's scales paled. Intelligence never mentioned anything like that. The structure pulsed with energy patterns that seemed almost organic, connected to every conditioning chamber through a network of quantum filaments. Data streams flowed between the prisoners and the crystal, carrying something that looked like compressed consciousness. They're not just conditioning the prisoners, Quill realized, their artistic mind grasping the terrible elegance of the design. They're harvesting their psychological patterns. That crystal, it's a repository of stolen minds. 3 entire species worth of consciousness, Nix confirmed, her readings showing impossible data densities. They're not creating servants. They're creating a database of every possible psychological response pattern in the galaxy. Kalen's strategic mind saw the full implications immediately. With that information, they could predict and counter any species' psychological responses. Perfect psychological warfare becomes possible. Not if we stop them, Grimm said, and his voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had never backed down from impossible odds. The shadow strike had materialized inside the station's docking bay, using the same adaptive camouflage that had hidden it in the star's corona. To the station's sensors, they were just another Syndicate patrol vessel returning from assignment. The conditioning process completes in 18 hours, Vexithara reported. After that, 3 species become permanently psychologically enslaved. Then, we have 18 hours to do something that's never been done before, Kalen said, checking his equipment. We rescue 3 entire species, destroy a psychological weapons program, and get out alive. Sounds like Tuesday? Zephyr grinned, powering down the ship's systems to minimum operational levels. Quill was already at the airlock, their artistic mind visualizing chaos like others might visualize symphonies. Time to show the Void Syndicate what human unpredictability really means. As the 5 humans prepared to enter the station, Vexithara realized she had unleashed something far more dangerous than she had intended. These weren't soldiers following orders. They were forces of creative destruction, each one capable of changing the rules of engagement simply by refusing to accept that rules existed. The Void Syndicate was about to learn why humanity had been quarantined from the galaxy. The interior of Nexus Station was a nightmare of clinical efficiency. Corridors that once bustled with interstellar commerce now echoed with the mechanical hum of psychological conditioning equipment. The 5 humans moved through the station like whispers of chaos, each following their nature while contributing to a plan that existed more as an understanding than a strategy. Nyx had integrated so completely with the station's systems that she was becoming part of its infrastructure. Her consciousness flowed through data streams, making subtle alterations that would cascade into major system failures, but only when she chose to trigger them. I'm mapping every prisoner location, she reported through the team's neural link. 2,347 beings across 17 species. The conditioning is 70% complete. Kalen moved through the administrative sections, his strategic mind absorbing the Syndicate's operational structure through direct observation. What he found was disturbing in its implications. This isn't just a conditioning facility, he transmitted. It's a testing ground. They're running experiments on different psychological warfare techniques, measuring effectiveness across species. His analysis was interrupted by the sound of approaching guards. Rather than hide, Kalen stepped into plain sight, wearing a stolen Syndicate uniform and carrying himself with the authority of someone who belonged exactly where he was. The guards passed without a second glance. Their conditioning prevented them from questioning apparent authority. Meanwhile, Grimm had found the station's security center. The Syndicate personnel there were physically superior to humans in every measurable way. Stronger, faster, better reflexes. It didn't matter. They fought like a computer program, following optimal tactical responses. Grimm fought like a storm given form, adapting and changing faster than their programming could follow. Within minutes, the security center was under his control, its personnel unconscious but alive. Security grid is compromised, he reported, his voice carrying grim satisfaction. But there's something else here. The guards, they're not just conditioned, they're networked. Individual consciousness suppressed in favor of collective efficiency. Zephyr had found her way to the station's power core, where she discovered something that made her pilot's instincts scream warnings. The station isn't just powered by fusion reactors, she transmitted. They're drawing energy directly from the prisoners' bioelectric fields. The conditioning process is literally feeding on their life force. The implications were staggering. The Syndicate hadn't just created a weapon of psychological warfare. They had created a system that grew stronger by consuming the minds and souls of its victims. Quill moved through the conditioning chambers like a ghost studying nightmares. Each chamber contained dozens of prisoners suspended in energy fields, their minds being systematically dismantled and reconstructed. But the artist in them saw something the others had missed. "The pattern isn't random," they broadcast. "They're not just breaking psychological conditioning, they're rewriting it. Every prisoner is being turned into a specific psychological archetype." The full scope of the Syndicate's plan became clear. They weren't creating servants. They were creating a species of psychological weapons, each prisoner designed to trigger specific responses in their own people when they returned home. At the N station's core, the massive crystal pulsed with stolen consciousness. Vexithara, monitoring from the shadow strike, watched in horror as the human's biometric readings spiked beyond what should have been survivable. "Your stress levels are off." "The charts," she transmitted. "You need to extract immediately." "Not yet," Kalen replied, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had found his purpose. "We're not here to rescue prisoners. We're here to break the system." The plan that emerged existed in the spaces between their individual actions. A symphony of chaos orchestrated by 5 minds that refused to accept impossible odds. Nix began feeding corrupted data into the conditioning systems, not destroying them but turning them against themselves. Kalen used his understanding of the Syndicate's hierarchy to create false orders that would cascade through their command structure. Grimm systematically disabled security nodes in a pattern that appeared random, but was actually designed to create maximum confusion. Zephyr began subtle alterations to the station's orbital mechanics, preparing for an exit strategy that existed, more as theoretical possibility than practical plan. And Quill began to sing. It wasn't a song in any conventional sense. It was a pattern of sound and silence that carried through the station's ventilation systems, reaching the prisoners in their conditioning chambers. The melody was mathematically impossible, acoustically improbable, and psychologically liberating. Where the Syndicate's conditioning sought to impose order, Quill's song celebrated chaos. Where the conditioning demanded conformity, the song insisted on individuality. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Prisoners began to wake from their induced comas, their minds rejecting the Syndicate's programming. The crystal at the station's core began to fluctuate as the stolen consciousness patterns it contained started to rebel against their imprisonment. "Impossible," transmitted Vexithara. "Individual consciousness can't resist collective psychological conditioning." "Human consciousness can," Kalen replied, watching as 3 entire species began to remember who they were. "Because we never learned how to surrender properly." The station's alarms began to sound as the Syndicate realized they were losing control. Emergency protocols activated, attempting to accelerate the conditioning process before the prisoners could fully wake. It was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. "Now," Kalen commanded, and 5 individual actions became a single devastating assault on the Syndicate's greatest weapon. Nix triggered the cascade failures she had built into the station's systems. Power grids collapsed in precisely the right sequence to disable conditioning equipment while keeping life support operational. Grimm activated security protocols that turned the station's defenses against its own personnel. Zephyr began the station's transformation from fortress to escape vessel, using its own engines to break orbit. Quill's song reached crescendo, shattering the psychological barriers that held 3 species in mental slavery. And in the crystal at the station's heart, thousands of stolen minds began to remember freedom. The revolution had reached its breaking point. What happened next would determine whether humanity's gift for chaos could overcome the Syndicate's mastery of order, or whether 5 humans had finally found odds too impossible to overcome. The crystal core of Nexus Station screamed. It was a sound that existed beyond acoustics, a harmonic resonance of thousands of liberated minds rejecting their imprisonment. The Void Syndicate's greatest weapon, Their repository of stolen consciousness was tearing itself apart from within as human unpredictability infected every psychological pattern it contained. Vex Thara watched from the Shadow Strike's sensors as impossible readings cascaded across her displays. "The station's quantum matrix is destabilizing," she transmitted urgently. "The psychic feedback is creating resonance cascades that could free every consciousness they've ever captured," Quill finished, their voice carrying harmonics that matched the crystal's liberation song. "Not just the prisoners here, but every mind they've stolen across 17 star systems." The implications were staggering. The Syndicate's psychological database contained the mental patterns of millions of beings, each one compressed and stored for analysis. If those patterns were released back to their original owners across the galaxy, it would break their entire psychological warfare program, Kalen realized, his strategic mind grasping the magnitude of what they had stumbled upon. "But the energy release will destroy the station," Nyx confirmed, her consciousness flowing. Through systems that were no longer entirely mechanical, the station's AI had evolved beyond its original programming, infected by human creativity until it thought more like an artist than a computer. "Unless we can channel it." Grim was fighting his way through corridors filled with Syndicate personnel, but these weren't the conditioned drones they had faced before. Desperation had awakened something approaching individual initiative in the enemy forces, making them dangerous in new ways. "Whatever we're doing, do it fast," he transmitted between impacts. "They're adapting." "They can't adapt to this," Zephyr replied. Her consciousness merged so completely with the station's navigation systems that she was becoming the station itself. "Because I'm not flying according to any known principles of physics. The station, larger than some moons, had begun to move in ways that violated several fundamental laws of space-time. Zephyr was treating the massive structure like a precision instrument, dancing it through gravitational fields and energy barriers that should have torn it apart. She was navigating by intuition rather than calculation, trusting human instinct over alien mathematics. At the crystal core, Quill continued their impossible song while Nyx worked to transform the station's psychic repository from a weapon of enslavement into an instrument of liberation. "I can redirect the quantum resonance," Nyx transmitted, her cybernetic implants glowing white-hot as she processed data streams that would have burned out any conventional AI. "But we need a transmission medium powerful enough to reach 17 star systems simultaneously." "The station's communication array isn't designed for psychic transmission," Vexathera warned from the Shadow Strike. "Then we make it designed for that," Kalen replied, his tactical mind seeing connections that conventional engineering would never consider. "Quill's song isn't just liberating the prisoners, it's creating a harmonic frequency that can carry consciousness patterns across quantum space." The plan that emerged existed in the realm beyond sanity. They would turn Nexus Station itself into a massive psychic transmitter, broadcasting the liberation frequency across the galaxy. Every mind the Syndicate had ever captured would receive an echo of human unpredictability, a reminder that consciousness couldn't be perfectly controlled. But first, they had to survive the next 60 seconds. The Syndicate's response was swift and merciless. Battle fleets that had been patrolling the outer system were converging on Nexus Station, their weapons powered by the same psychological conditioning technology that had enslaved 3 species. They weren't just firing energy weapons. They were firing weaponized despair. "Incoming psychological warfare barrage," Vexthara reported, her instruments detecting energy patterns designed to induce species-specific terror responses. "Those weapons will break the will of any normal crew." "Good thing we're not normal," Grim replied, feeling the psychic assault wash over him like a gentle breeze. Where other beings would experience paralyzing fear, he felt only the familiar comfort of impossible odds. Is it wrong that this makes me nostalgic? The human resistance to psychological warfare wasn't just immunity, it was conversion. Each attempt to break their spirits only made them more creatively destructive. Zephyr began piloting the station like a weapon itself, using its massive bulk to shield the liberated prisoners while positioning it for maximum transmission range. Transmission in 30 seconds, Nyx announced, her consciousness now distributed across every system in the station. She had become more than human, more than AI. She had become the voice of liberation itself. The Syndicate fleets opened fire with conventional weapons, filling space with energy that could crack planets. It didn't matter. Zephyr was no longer flying according to any known principles of physics, treating the laws of space-time as suggestions rather than absolutes. The station danced between weapon strikes that should have been impossible to dodge, its massive form moving with the grace of a hummingbird. 10 seconds, Nyx transmitted. The crystal core reached critical resonance, thousands of liberated minds singing in harmony with Quill's impossible song. The station's communication array, rebuilt in real time by human creativity, prepared to broadcast freedom across 17 star systems. 5 seconds. Grimm reached the station's primary shield generator and did something that no Syndicate engineer had ever considered. He turned it inside out. Instead of protecting the station, the shields began projecting outward, creating a quantum bubble that would amplify the psychic transmission. Transmission beginning. Across the galaxy, in 17 star systems under Syndicate control, millions of beings felt something they had forgotten existed: the possibility of hope. The psychic conditioning that had turned them into willing slaves began to crack as human unpredictability infected their consciousness patterns. The Void Syndicate's perfect order met humanity's perfect chaos, and chaos won. Fleets began to mutiny as crews remembered their own names. Worlds rose in rebellion as populations rejected psychological conditioning. The Syndicate's vast empire of controlled minds began to collapse as consciousness itself remembered how to be free. But the victory came with a price. The psychic transmission was consuming Nexus Station from within, its structure unable to contain the energies they had unleashed. The 5 humans had perhaps minutes before the station tore itself apart. "Extraction window opening," Vexithera transmitted from the Shadow Strike. "You need to leave now." "Not yet," Kalen replied, watching as the last groups of prisoners made their way to escape pods. "We're not leaving anyone behind." "The station won't survive another minute," Vexithera warned. "Then we better work fast," Zephyr grinned, already calculating impossible navigation solutions. What happened next violated so many principles of engineering, physics, and common sense that Vexithera would spend years trying to understand it. Using a combination of controlled explosions, gravitational manipulation, and what could only be described as aggressive optimism, the 5 humans turned the station's death throes into a final act of liberation. As Nexus Station came apart, its destruction created a quantum shockwave that carried the liberation frequency even further across the galaxy. The Syndicate's psychological conditioning technology, dependent on quantum entanglement with their central database, found itself transmitting freedom instead of enslavement. The Shadow Strike materialized around the 5 humans through a transportation method that Nyx had improvised from the station's collapsing matter-energy converters. One moment, they were standing in a disintegrating space station. The next, they were aboard their ship, watching as 17 star systems began to remember what it meant to be free. "Impossible?" Vexithera whispered, studying the readings that showed the Syndicate's empire collapsing in real time. "We prefer?" "Improbable," Quill corrected, their artistic mind already visualizing the chaos they had unleashed across the galaxy. "Impossible suggests it can't be done. Improbable just means no one else was crazy enough to try it." The Void Syndicate's perfect order had been shattered by 5 humans who refused to accept that surrender was inevitable. that consciousness could be controlled, or that impossible odds were actually impossible. As the Shadow Strike departed the ruins of Nexus Station, Vexathara realized that the war wasn't over. It had been fundamentally changed. The Syndicate would adapt, but they would be adapting to an enemy that had already proven adaptation itself could be weaponized. What now? She asked the 5 humans who had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Kalen smiled, his strategic mind already working on problems that didn't yet exist. Now we go find the next impossible thing that needs doing. The Syndicate still controls their core systems, Nyx noted, her consciousness once again fully human, but retaining echoes of the vast intelligence she had become. They'll regroup, adapt their tactics. Good, Grimm replied, testing new weapons that the station's advanced fabrication systems had created for him. It was getting boring. Zephyr was already plotting courses that would take them to places that didn't officially exist. I've identified 17 systems where the liberation frequency is being suppressed. Apparently, some Syndicate commanders have developed countermeasures. Then we'll have to develop countermeasures. Quill laughed. This is going to be fun. Vexathara watched the 5 humans plan their next impossible mission and realized she had created something far more dangerous than a weapon. She had given human unpredictability access to technology that made miracles routine. The galaxy would never be the same. As the Shadow Strike vanished into hyperspace, carrying 5 humans toward their next confrontation with impossible odds, the Void Syndicate began to understand what the galactic quarantine had really been protecting them from. Humanity hadn't been quarantined because they were too dangerous to contact. They had been quarantined because they were too dangerous to control. The war for galactic freedom had truly begun, and for the first time in history, impossible odds were fighting on the side of liberty. In the years that followed, the legend of the 5 humans who broke the Void Syndicate's psychological empire would spread throughout the galaxy. But Kalen, Nyx, Grimm, Zephyr, and Quill were already beyond legend, having moved on to impossibilities that made their first mission seem simple by comparison. Because that's what humans do. They find the next impossible thing and make it inevitable. The galaxy had learned why Earth was quarantined. Now it would learn why that had been the wisest decision in galactic history, and why breaking that quarantine had been even wiser. Some weapons, once unleashed, cannot be contained. Some forces, once freed, refuse to be controlled. And some species, once introduced to the galaxy, change the very nature of what's possible. Humanity had arrived among the stars not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous, as the species that had never learned that some things simply cannot be done.